Hello all. Thank you for joining this webinar. This is Akash Handa from Qglue team, and I welcome you all for this webinar on entrepreneurship. Just for your reference, the webinar is hosted by Jan Kennedy, who is there with us on the call. Uh, Jan is CEO at AFC, one of the pioneers in corporate entrepreneurship. He oversees the design and implementations of various programs covering different stages of the innovation process for many Fortune 500 organizations. For 5 years, he was also a director at the Founder Institute, the world's largest mentoring program for early stage entrepreneurs, launching over more than 1,000 companies per year with a 72% survival rate. A quick word on Qglue. Qglue is promoted by QAI. You must have heard about the company QAI. It's a 25-year-old transactional consultation organization originally set up by Bill Perry in USA. And Qglue is the design arm of QAI, which helps accelerating design-led innovation through a variety of interventions. As part of a charter, we also bring you the best in the world, and you will be glad to know we have partnered with AFC and Jan Kennedy, who is with us on the call. There are many joint initiatives planned, and we would be happy to discuss with you over email and a separate call. Welcoming you all again, the webinar would now begin, and you can all raise your questions online through the chat window in your screen. All the questions will be answered at the end of the session. Jan, I would now request you to take the session forward, please.
Great, thanks Akash. Can you just confirm you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining. I know it's troubling times right now, but it's great with this technology. We can do all of this from home. So this is about intrapreneurship and why it is a viable innovation strategy. I'm going to share some experiences that we've learned over the years since 2014 in running these programs. And I would like to consolidate that in 5 lessons, but also give you a good insight into the Kickbox program that we talked about when advertising this event, because that really is a great program to get started with this type of entrepreneurial activity. So a little bit about my background. I actually was an entrepreneur earlier at Intel. I was lucky enough to work on projects and generated $1 billion of value to that company through entrepreneurship. I then gained a lot of unicorn startup experience working in Silicon Valley, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Germany, with a very fast growing company that at that time was making 140 million in sales revenue. I then joined the world's largest accelerator program called Founder Institute that's launched over 3,000 startup ventures, now valued at 15 billion. And those ventures have a 78% survival rate after going through the accelerator program. And that is really what led me to found the Academy for Corporate Entrepreneurship, because we saw a lot of people were frustrated with innovation inside their company, and they weren't getting a chance to innovate internally, so they were actually being forced to leave. So we started looking at how can we make entrepreneurship work inside companies. And this is really what we've been doing over the last 6 years, de-risking innovation journeys. We've been working with many large companies around the world and probably delivering our programs and initiatives in 24 countries in total. And now we have this partnership with Qglue for the Indian market specifically. So if anyone is interested to talk more at the end, please drive your queries to Qglue and I will give you some contact information at the end. So where will the next $1 billion idea come from? I think that's a critical question a lot of people in innovation are asking themselves. And of course, we have a lot of R&D activity. This is typically where a lot of value is created, but it doesn't typically help us generate new business models or service offerings, which is what corporates are looking for today. You might ask your sales team to get all fired up and drive more revenue through existing cash cow operations. But again, that's not helping us to expand into new markets. You could try acquisitions, right? The recent acquisition from Walmart with Flipkart in India. Again, it's very much hit and miss. You are waiting a long time for that startup to already prove itself, and then it becomes very expensive. In this case, $16 billion were spent. You might set up an outpost in Silicon Valley and try to be close to the latest technological developments and mindset. But again, that can be hit and miss, and you can be very cut off from the existing organization. So this brings us to the topic of intrapreneurs, the one role that might save your company's future. And that's what I want to touch on today. So intrapreneurship is a viable innovation strategy. And just to be clear to everyone, so that we're all on the same page, intrapreneurship is the act of behaving like an entrepreneur, but within a large organization. So we can't translate entrepreneurship one for one from the outside world into the organization. Things do have to be set up a little bit differently. And it is becoming more important because if we take a step back and we look at the corporate world, and in this case, the S&P 500, we can see that the average lifespan of listed companies is dramatically decreasing. Currently around 15 years, you can expect to be on that list. But the number of companies on that list is forecasted to drop by 75% in 2027. Here are some examples of companies that have entered that list on the left-hand side. This is very much US based, and companies, well-known brands that have been around for a long time, but lost their competitive edge, often as a result of being disrupted, not maintaining their innovation activities, and therefore they became relatively irrelevant in the market and lost their place on the S&P 500. And this process is becoming faster and faster. And if we look at the speed of innovation and value creation, right, it took HP 20 years to become a billion-dollar company. Then Microsoft 10 years, Dell 7 years, and then Amazon, it took them 4 years to be valued at $1 billion. Instagram achieved that valuation within 2 years, and the fastest company still to date is actually Slack to become $1 billion company in 8 months. So value creation can actually happen very quickly if you are driving innovation. So we also should remind ourselves in this context, what is innovation? What is the equation? What does it mean? And very much people get it confused with invention, right? Which is actually, that's what R&D is all about. R&D is inventing something new, a novel way of doing something. But innovation actually only occurs when you multiply invention with commercialization. So this is the front end, this is the business model side of things, to actually offer something that customers want to buy and will keep buying. And that's when you get innovation. So I'd like to just touch on some of our work with Bayer, because they are by far our largest customer and where we've really been able to use them as a testing ground for a lot of our methodologies. When they were talking about their innovation vision, they said that the purpose of corporate innovation as a team inside the company is to empower the 117,000 employees to innovate in what we do. And there's a few things that go along with this that I think are important to note. So they said that product innovation, i.e. relying on R&D alone, is not enough. They were looking for new business models and new processes to add on to their product services. They wanted to realize their vision by empowering entrepreneurship. So that's where this topic of intrapreneurship comes in. They realized there was value in making employees more entrepreneurial. And they realized there was a certain way of doing that. So they decided to focus on 3 methodologies in order to help bring innovation to market. This was creativity through, for example, systematic inventive thinking. These are ways to solve problems or think about problems in different ways. They wanted to be more customer focused. And I think we've all heard a lot about customer centricity and therefore learning design thinking principles. But that's not enough. You had to take it one step further, and that was really to apply experimentation, which is at the heart of the lean startup and agile methodology. Once you got good at applying those methodologies, they needed to train coaches and ambassadors to help spread those methodologies. And from an investment point of view or funding point of view, they decided to systematically invest more in ideas as the risk declined. So these ideas had to start proving themselves, and only then could they receive more money, which is very much in line with a Silicon Valley VC portfolio approach. And in order to help them do that, which of course was very wise, was realizing they couldn't do it all by themselves internally. So they actually looked externally for strategic partners like AFCE that they filtered down from 100 innovation agencies out there. So lesson one I want to touch on is structure. Innovation is a structured journey, not a 2-day workshop or a sprint. And often too many people believe they can learn innovation in a couple of days, and that is simply not the case, right? Innovation is a journey, and it can be a tough journey. If we look at happiness levels here on the left-hand side, when you start a new project, your initial enthusiasm can be very high. It's very easy to get excited about the idea, but once you start going to the market and testing things, reality soon sets in, and you realize everything isn't working out how you imagined it to, right? And things get tough. So you enter this space called the trough of sorrow, and you have to do a lot of experimenting, a lot of pivoting to figure out again, you know, how do I solve a real problem for a real customer? What should my solution be? How can I start to get traction? There's a lot of questions you have, and you don't have very many answers right now, especially if the idea you're working on is more disruptive and different to what you've been doing before. But hopefully, if you're applying the right methodologies, over time it starts to work, and then your happiness levels increase as you find problem solution fit and then product market fit, and later you can begin to scale. So we've got to recognize this, that intrapreneurship sucks for a lot of the time. It's really difficult, and it's easy to get down, and it's easy to give up. So you have to be, you know, a special character to be able to keep going. So in terms of structuring the innovation journey, this is how we look at innovation with Bayer. We have 4 main phases that we know we need to go through. We need to go through ideation, where we're developing ideas and forming teams. We then need to go through discovery, where we're finding problem solution fit. That means I'm actually solving a real problem for a real customer in a feasible way. And only then will I move on to an incubation phase, which is actually building out the solution feature by feature in order to learn, am I able to achieve product market fit and get this ready with a viable business model in order to go into launch with a go-to-market pilot and get traction. I've put some numbers here to indicate how long each phase typically takes, the percentage of time that individuals need to invest, and they should be working as teams, and also the number of teams that Bayer actually push through these programs. So they have a different approach for every phase here, and that's important to remember, that you have to specifically design your program to address the different phases. And here are also some conversion rates, because not every idea or team survives every phase, right? So from ideation to discovery, we see 30% of applicants can be accepted. Then we only see 60% maximum finding problem solution fit. So a maximum of 60% could get funded to go into incubation. And then you see about half of those teams fail and drop out, and only half would be able to continue if they manage to find a sponsor. And in terms of programs, we'll touch a little bit on Kickbox later, but you can see here with Kickbox, a standard accelerator or a disruptive accelerator, these are different approaches you can use to get from ideation all the way through discovery, hopefully across the valley of death, where good ideas go to die if they weren't properly validated, and get into that incubation stage. And when it gets into this phase, you need a different program again that uses different working methods and techniques before going then into a go-to-market pilot. So it would be wrong to assume that I can just use design thinking for everything, for example, that gets me from end to end. You actually need to apply different methodologies throughout, and that needs to be structured in the program design. So lesson number 2 is going to be about people. Innovation relies on suitable personalities working in a balanced team more so than the idea. And this is often learned the hard way, although investors say they often fund the person and not the idea, because the idea is actually going to change a lot anyway. So when we do these pitch events inside companies, and we do these events very early on, it actually doesn't make much sense, because they are all designed to look at the idea rather than the individual. We have to ask ourselves the question, who is an intrapreneur, who is a good fit for intrapreneurship. And something we've learned over the years is that from all the people that actually apply to be part of an innovation or entrepreneurship program inside a corporate, if we go and look at their personality, only 30 to 50% of those applicants are a good fit. This is not even the total number in the company, right? These are the people putting up their hands saying, I want to be a part of this. 30 to 50% are a good fit. And the way we know that is because we can actually look at the personality, or the DNA, we call it sometimes, of those individuals. And we've learned over time that there are critical traits that common intrapreneurs and entrepreneurs actually have in common when they are successful. So that's a focus on generating novel solutions and creative ideas to solve problems, for example. Convincing others of an idea and influencing decision-making is also considered to be important, but not as important as innovation. Under adaptation, this is about adjusting to changes in the workplace while remaining positive. That is something that's going to happen a lot as you're going along that journey of innovation or through the trough of sorrow. In decision-making, this is also a helpful trait. Making high-quality decisions based on limited information. You don't have time to get market research reports, right? You might only have time to interview 20 customers initially, and based on that, you have to make a decision and move forward to the next step. And then, of course, conflict resolution, bringing others together to resolve conflict and reconcile differences, especially within the team. So we can also ask ourselves, are more senior people a better fit? Because they're more senior, they're more accomplished at their careers, or maybe they've been in the company longer. And we've also found that that is not the case. Here's an example where Allianz had the most senior people in a program, and Qglue lubrication had, let's say, the least senior people in a program. And the percentage above the logo here is how good a fit those applicants were. So actually very few people in the Allianz program were deemed on personality a good fit for the program. And with Qglue, the less senior people, more people were actually a good fit. So that actually shows you your best intrapreneurs could come from anywhere in the organization. It's not based necessarily on age, it's not based on how senior you are, and it might not be based on how long you've been in the company. So it's very worthwhile to look at personality. Lesson number 3 is about testing. Testing is not trivial. You must enable teams to run experiments with prototypes in days rather than weeks or months. And all too often we see coaches coming in and telling teams, hey, you should probably run some experiments and test some assumptions, but the teams don't have the resources or the know-how how to set up these experiments, and it ends up taking months when really it should be done in hours and days. So at the Academy, this forced us to create a function, we call it the Prototype Fund, where we actually give teams access to fast prototyping and testing resources. They can access developers, designers, online marketers, and project managers to help them create different types of experiments and MVPs and prototypes of their idea that they can quickly put in front of the customer to test different assumptions that they need to look at. So there are actually 24 different commonly used experiment types by corporate startup teams. And they would typically have to work with a mentor to determine exactly how to set up which experiment in order to test the assumption that is valuable to them at that time. But giving them the ability to do this quickly is really important. And in order to do that, you could provide them with some kind of guide and access to resources where they can learn about what are these experiment types, which ones might I need, help them plan a series of experiments that they can run to test their idea, and then even give them currency to use, right? So that they can manage a budget without having to go and get extra sign-off or approval, and they can then split that budget across different experiments that they can run with this team at their disposal. And all of this can be done, for example, in a platform where they're able to communicate directly with that team and fill in certain templates and receive results within 72 hours, so they can actually run their experiment and get real-world results and validation before making a decision and moving on to the next step. So this has been a really important innovation in the way that we handle entrepreneurship teams. The next lesson is to hold their hand, and actually hold their hand at every step of the way and don't let go. A little bit like a baby learning to walk, I suppose. If entrepreneurs are sent off into the wilderness, often they have not done this before. They're going to get lost and sidetracked and distracted very easily. So they need to be kept on track. So if I give you an example here of, this comes from our Accelerator curriculum that typically spans over 12 weeks. Every week you kind of have a different focus as you are maturing the idea from left to right, right? So you cover design thinking related topics in the early weeks, then moving on a bit more to lean startup, then you're addressing sales and marketing issues before wrapping things off with a business model and getting ready for a pitch. For every step, entrepreneurs don't really know what to do. So they need to be drip-fed curriculum. They need education and information that can help them at that moment in time on that set of tasks that is actually important for them at that week. And then they need to be given mentoring as well. So we'll come on to that. But what you can see here is that you might start with a blended learning approach. So you have a physical event in the beginning to get everyone aligned and kick them off. And then you might go into a virtual structure for a few weeks. And the green or yellow smiley faces here represent virtual mentoring sessions, where a team might be checking in for an hour and a half in a structured way with mentors that are able to give them feedback on some of the educational materials they've been using. The team should have been doing some assignments and also designing an experiment to help them test certain assumptions. And that's where the mentor would be steering them and navigating them and keeping them on track. Then coming together again physically halfway through, for example, and then maybe again at the end after more virtual engagement. So this approach of drip feeding, rather than giving them a big course up front and then letting them run for 3 months and then pitch, is much more effective in keeping the team on track and making sure they get real world validation. And that has improved the survival rate of teams going through the process. So at this moment, within this subcategory of lesson 4, I want to introduce you a little bit to the Kickbox program. That is a low-cost, scalable and guided DIY kit for employees to innovate. It's something you can do at low cost, and it's fairly scalable because it has all the tools in one box with an online platform as well, that you can kind of roll out to a group of teams or a big portion of the organization with low organizational effort. And what this program does is it basically lets the market decide which is a good idea. You don't have to go and evaluate much the idea or even the team up front. You just let them get on with the process, and the process will automatically filter them out based on merit. And this allows entrepreneurs to bubble up to the surface so you can then work with them more in the next step. So here's an image of what a box might look like. It could be a physical cardboard box, branded, with all the tools inside and instructions. And the instructions are going to tell you how to develop and evolve your idea through 6 levels: inception, ideation, improving, investigating, then iterating, and then infiltrate. And actually in the beginning, you don't even need an idea. As you can see from here, the level 2 is designed to actually help you figure out what your idea should be. And then you can move forward to improve that idea and further investigate it. So this is something Bayer have introduced as one of their early stage programs before jumping into a corporate startup accelerator. And they're trying to roll this out to 300 teams annually. It is also, as we discussed with lesson 1, a very structured approach, right? It's 6 levels, and within each level is the appropriate amount of guidance. So there is educational material that you follow in the booklet, but also in the online platform that teaches you what you need to know for each level, and then leads you into doing certain assignments that help you apply that education to your idea, meaning you can develop your idea further to materialize it a bit more. And then at the end of most level, you see here you end it with a mentor call that might be 30 minutes or 60 minutes long. So it's quite minimal mentoring support that you achieve, and that helps keep the cost down, but it is enough to keep teams on track. And that is where they can discuss the assignments and the work they've done with a mentor. They can gain some feedback about their idea, and they can make sure that their assignments are in order for when they upload it in order to get through to the next level. Because this is stage gated. Only if they complete the assignment satisfactorily and prove they are evolving their idea can they move to the next level. So that's the structure that's being applied here. They do run a few rounds of interviews. They do run a couple of experiments. They do have to get a sponsor involved. They do have to talk to various people internally as well as their customers. And they have to prove that they've done a couple of experiments and then prepare for a pitch at the end. So it's a great way of filtering ideas. And for each level, as I said, there is the appropriate amount of support. So these are topics that are covered from the educational side. For every level, they will learn certain things. Like if I look at level 2, how to use how might we questions. They learn what is design thinking and how to apply it. There's some challenges involved in here. There's the jobs to be done method. You're taught convergent and divergent thinking. You have case studies that you can look at. And then it goes on to help you with identifying early adopters, how to segment your customers, and gives you the actual worksheets that you need to work with as well. So here's a few screenshots from the platform. It's all online, it's mobile and tablet friendly. It's very interactive. So people can engage with this you know, a little bit every week, not all in one go, and then apply it to their real world situation as they are evolving their idea. Got some nice drag and drop exercises here, examples from intrapreneurship and the startup industry as well. And then they have to fill in their assignment or multiple assignments sometimes for each level and upload that to someone that will actually check it and give them feedback and ensure it's compelling enough in order to move on to the next level. Also, prototyping is included, right? So this is an important aspect. We want them to test their ideas. So we thought it was important to give them a very minimum prototype fund where they could still do certain things like set up a landing page and drive some online ads to that page, or design a clickable app prototype maybe, and at least have the screens and be able to go and show customers how their app might work, as well as other things like getting surveys up and running or doing an online marketing campaign or a flyer, etc. So all of that is included in the box, and teams can make use of that. And if your idea is not digital, you could actually use the physical option to get more design sketches of physical products. So you can visualize what your solution is going to look like and use that in your experiments as well. All of this, though, needs to be wrapped up with what I call tough love from mentors, and specifically mentors who have been there, done that. Too often in organizations, we rely on internal advice from senior management who maybe haven't started a new venture before or a startup idea. And they're just relying on their experience of having managed the cash cow. And although that might be useful in certain aspects, what you really need as an entrepreneur is to learn from another entrepreneur or an entrepreneur who has kind of been through that trough of sorrow and the valley of death and understands what you're going through and can give you good guidance. They need to keep you honest to the process of design thinking, lean startup, remaining agile, and not give you the answers. It's not about telling you what to do or being a subject matter expert. Therefore, they're transferring the skills to help with talent development, right? And to build you up as an entrepreneur so you are more capable in making the right decisions. And normally these people should have combined expertise of the startup world and the corporate innovation world as well. These guys are also Switzerland, right? They are neutral, they are non-biased, they are not invested in your idea and can then jump away from tunnel vision and give you advice that is more clear-cut than what you might get internally. And typically they're rolling up their sleeves with you and working with you in the team to identify what are the most critical assumptions that need to be tested. So good mentoring has been invaluable to teams, and it can be strategically placed virtually or physically along that innovation journey that you're going through. So just to summarize now with Kickbox, this whole program was originally launched by Adobe and created. It didn't have some of the elements that I've just described to you, like the prototype fund. They relied on a credit card only, and people had to figure out themselves what to spend the money on. They didn't receive so much mentoring or support or educational materials that taught them what they needed to know at every level. And I think that's why you see lower conversion rates on the left-hand side. Only 6% of teams were getting through to level 6 and completing, whereas what we've seen is that we've actually managed to quadruple that and get over 27% of teams completing the program successfully. So there's a 400% improvement there, and it shows that those things really make the difference. Okay, so let's come back to our structure and now just focus a little bit on lesson 5. This is about sustaining and scaling. So once you've put these measures into place, you need to make it easy for others to adopt this way of working by transferring a lot of the assets and the know-how that you've developed to other areas of the business. So one way of doing that can be to create an entrepreneur certification, for example, with train the trainer programs, so they can train others at various stages. If we look at the whole innovation process, as I showed you the structure earlier, ideation, discovery, incubation, and launch, as an entrepreneur goes through a program that was designed for each phase, you could argue they have now gained certain amount of skills, and therefore we can put that together in a digital certificate for them that they can now showcase online. And if we further upskilled that person, if they were deemed a good fit for coaching and training and mentoring other people, we could give them a train the trainer course where they learn how to apply what they learned and teach other people, right? And then they can become the internal coach rather than having to rely on an external mentor. So a lot of our processes are about transferring the entrepreneurial mindset and skill so they can further transfer to other people, and having that certification system in place is a great way of doing that. But just being mindful of, you know, where are they at in the innovation process? Where did they gain their experience? You know, what have they really learned? Just because someone went through discovery phase doesn't mean, you know, or they probably most certainly can't teach someone else how to go through an incubation phase if they've never gone through it themselves or learned the associated materials. So we see 6 levels here of maturity that are all also very much based on experience. This is what a certificate could look like that could be issued, right? And let someone have that online for their LinkedIn profile, for example. And if you click on it, it will then show you the associated skills that were gained as well. So that's something that Bayer is doing with Train the Trainer programs and certification. And something else they're doing is really developing their own internal innovation catalog, or to be able to offer innovation as a service to other functions across the business. So it depends how the company is set up, but one opportunity you might have is an internal purchasing system where you're able to order certain things, and you could productize a lot of the methodologies and offerings you have and put it into that system to make it more accessible to other people so that they start adopting the way that you are working. So for example, if you had implemented that Kickbox program and you adapted it to your organization and figured out how to make it work for you, you could productize that and now make it available to other departments that want to, maybe they can take it for free, or they buy it from you internally, or buy it from someone who was offering it externally. But the important thing is productized in the way that you know works for your company and has the flexibility that you need. And that is another way of spreading and transferring the methodologies that you've been working with. So yeah, I'm gonna start to close now. By running these entrepreneurship programs, Bayer have almost achieved 1 billion in new value, 1 billion euros in new value from this portfolio of entrepreneurship projects. That would be by using Kickbox, It would be by using the corporate startup accelerator process through the discovery phase. Also having teams go into incubation and then going on to launch. And they recently did a snapshot of those projects and saw the value that was being appreciated. And if you think about that, that actually puts them on par with what is normal for blockbuster drugs as coming out of an R&D activity, right? A blockbuster drug is considered to be a new billion-dollar opportunity. So what they've done with intrapreneurship is actually matching now in terms of value creation R&D. And you could argue it was potentially done faster. This is really happening in the last 3 years, whereas R&D can sometimes take 7 or 8 years before something is released onto the market. So to recap, the lessons learned in rolling out intrapreneurship is very much around structure your journey, right? You need different structure or different approach at different points in the journey. It's a step-by-step process. Invest in people over ideas. Don't get excited by the ideas. Don't fall into the trap of innovation theater and getting excited around technology only. Always think about the commercialization side and really look at the people that can drive this for you in the long term and not just in a 2-day workshop. Figure out ways to enable teams to test their assumptions in days and not months, right? Really bring down the cost of experimentation and increase the speed and make it easy for them. Maybe work with legal if you have to. We did run into roadblocks where, testing can be a bit iffy. There's a lot of compliance issues inside a company like Bayer, and I'm sure other companies face that as well. Offer guidance at every step. So the educational materials, the drip feeding approach, and wrapping that up with mentoring support from people that have been there, done that is absolutely crucial in order to bring that mindset over to the corporate startup team. And also meet that corporate startup team where they are at and making sure they're getting the right support at that moment in time. And we're not just feeding them lots of information that they potentially don't need or wouldn't be able to apply yet to their project. And then ultimately figuring out how to sustain and scale, ideally by transferring your assets and your know-how to other people, especially internal coaches that can go on then and support more people in working this way. And that will be a cheaper way for you to run innovation in the long term. So I was doing some research earlier, and it was very interesting that the top 10 job skills in 2020 actually have a huge overlap with intrapreneurship. So if we look at these top 10 skills on the left-hand side, complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, these are things intrapreneurs are doing by default all the time. You have to identify problems and find unique solutions. You have to understand causality versus effect, right? So what's the true cause? And that's what's behind applying lean startup. Creativity is all about using design thinking and ideation. Emotional intelligence, we know that successful entrepreneurs have a high EQ by default, and that's something you can look for in people's personalities. Judgment and decision making, for example, you're doing that week in, week out as an entrepreneur because you're talking to customers, running interviews, you're running experiments. You have to judge the results that are coming back and learn how to read in between the lines and make decisions in order to move forward quickly. Same goes for service orientation, right? That is really customer centricity, walking in your customer's shoes and looking at things from a different point of view. So there's a lot of things here that really overlap with intrapreneurship, and that's why I believe also training and educating certain aspects or certain people inside your workforce can be very valuable for teaching them the skills that they need to be future leaders in the organization as well. Okay, so that's it from my side in terms of presenting. We would like to connect with you. Qglue is our official and only partner in India. So if you have any inquiries, please reach out to them on this email address. They are in 4 locations, including Singapore, the US, and China. And we do have a little surprise for you as well. Let me just go on here quickly. We do have some e-learning. So we will email you some information later, but if you attended this webinar, you'll be able to get a discount on an e-learning course that's all about entrepreneurship, and it's 7 hours worth of content. Here are all the different chapters involved. A lot of that covers also what is in the Kickbox program. So if you're interested to get that course, you can also reach out to the email address as well. But I think the organizers will follow up with you on that one. Okay, I think we can open it up for questions. Okay, let me see. I've got to find where the questions are. Okay, I don't see any questions at the moment. Akash?
Hi, Yan. Yan, you can see the questions in the questions tab to your right.
Oh, it showed answers. Well, could you read one or two out to me?
Yeah, sure. So I'll read the questions for you, and then you can say the answers, please.
Okay.
So the first question is from Kiran. Will I get a copy of the slide deck after the webinar? So yes, Kiran, obviously we'll share the slide deck after the webinar. You'll get it through a mail. So obviously, yes. That is a quick question which I've already answered. The next question is from Martin Kos. And his question is, what is the most difficult phase of all the 4 phases?
Oh, that is a good question. That's a great question. What's the most difficult one? I think it has to depend on what the setup already is in the company. But let me assume we're asking that from the entrepreneur's point of view, right? Probably the discovery phase. So finding problem solution fit. And the reason is because we get so excited about our ideas, we jump into solution space very easily, right? And we forget to really validate the problem and validate the customer. And really that is why this valley of death exists. It's often a gap between discovery and incubation, and where a lot of innovation efforts fall in there. And I still think that's true today as it was 5 years ago, because it's a big thing for people to get their head around. So if they're not given the right guidance and the right support, it's very easy to fall into that trap. And that's also why we see, a 90% failure rate of a lot of innovation projects. So you really have to design very carefully to be able to make that jump over the valley of death and get into incubation. Once you're into incubation, I would argue it's easier from an entrepreneur's point of view, simply because you've more or less proven your problem, your customer, partially your business model. You have some traction, and now you're actually just focused on building the solution. And in this phase, it's learning how to use, an agile method rather than a waterfall method. But a Scrum Master and a developer team can actually help you with that. So you don't need to learn so much of it. A lot of the thinking for you can be done with a supporting developer team. And you just kind of need to steer it in the right direction with engaging with the customer. So that's why I would argue discovery is probably more difficult than incubation.
Thank you, and I hope this answers the question. We have again a question from Martin Kos, and the question is it all internal teams in the program, or can you combine with external people resources?
Yeah, you can combine with external resources. I would argue then things become more difficult just from a mindset point of view, different cultures, scheduling. Most of our experience, though, I have to say, from AFCE running these programs is simply with teams from the same company.
Thank you, Jan. Again, the question is from Martin Kos, and the question, we have pretty much questions from Martin actually. So I'll go one by one. The next question is, what are the most recent trends in intrapreneurship?
What are the most recent trends in entrepreneurship? That's a good question. I would say prototyping, prototyping even is a better word, right? So it's not just about prototyping anymore. It's about what can I do before prototyping. And there's this trend or topic called prototyping, which is focusing on, really faking the experience, fake it until you make it. So it's developing something that doesn't actually work, doesn't deliver value, but it fakes the experience for the end user. So you can trick that user into a behavior which you're then able to monitor and accept as currency for your experimentation. So I would say that's a big one right now, which plays directly into our prototype fund support. That's why many of those experiments actually do cover prototyping as well as prototyping. Are there questions from other people as well, different countries?
Yeah. So I'm going one by one actually. So the next question is from Vandana, and she says that she's running an internal innovation program and is curious to know what is the best way to measure the success of an internal innovation program. Should one focus on quantitative metrics like number of ideas scaled, or qualitative metrics like learning, etc.?
Yep, both metrics are good. It's always good to look at learning as well. So I find entrepreneurship programs always sit in the middle, right? They're very educational, yet they can also get very good results and ROI from innovation activity. So the main thing you should look at is conversion rate from phase to phase. So I just jump back to this slide. I'm still sharing my screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We can see.
So if you can see this, so these are actually very good conversion rates, and you should try to optimize your program to get this kind of conversion rate from phase to phase. So that would be one way of looking at it. Also looking at engagement levels, right? So how engaged are people with your program and content, or do they tend to drop out? And yeah, if you want, I give you a secret link, right? There's a secret link called afc.co/ROI. If you really want to do some calculations and look at your entire portfolio for your program, you can go here and kind of use a calculator, which helps you calculate backwards from how many projects you launch. So if you wanted to launch 5 projects, it calculates backwards how many projects would you typically need to have in incubation, discovery, and ideation. And you can maybe compare that with your own metrics. This is based on data that we are seeing in terms of conversion metrics. That would give you a very good benchmark to compare your own program against. So I hope that helps from the portfolio side of things. And of course, looking ultimately at value. Once those projects do become more mature, can you quantify them in terms of their potential value that they can create for the organization, which is how Bayer were able to say, okay, we're currently at 900 million, almost $1 billion of new value creation.
Thank you, Jan, for the answer. I'll read the next question for you. So it says, when should I do open innovation instead? When is it entrepreneurship better? Basically, he's asking of when should we opt for entrepreneurship and when should we do open innovation instead?
Yeah, that's also a really great question. Okay, so personally, I view open innovation is a different strategy. It's a little bit like that acquisition scenario, right? I rather go and acquire rather than develop by myself. I'm not sure you should choose one over the other. Both can be pursued, and many companies are pursuing both simultaneously. There is just amazing value within your own existing workforce that can be tapped if you can tap it in the right way. And you can still pair intrapreneurship with open innovation. I think their paths cross, for example, during or towards the end of the incubation stage. So once an intrapreneurship team has figured out what idea they should be working on, that it's really valuable, they've got sponsors involved, they might get to the point where they don't have the ability to produce the technology. They might struggle to actually build the solution to a point where you can actually launch it into the marketplace, right? So between this purple and pink phase, that is actually an opportune moment to go and see what else is out there in the market and potentially partner with other startups, which would be a form of open innovation. Open innovation, however, could also be applied at the very beginning in order to fuel ideation, right? Because that's why people do technology scouting or go to Silicon Valley to see what companies are working on, because it gives you inspiration and it gives you ideas. So you could do light open innovation in terms of having competitions or ideation challenges that might help you and internal teams to pick up good ideas to work on if you're not able to generate those ideas by yourself internally. But then as an intrapreneurship team, you still need to be responsible for taking that through the discovery phase and really figuring out, can we get problem solution fit with this idea, right? So sometimes their paths will cross, but they can also definitely be pursued as different strategies, and I can't say if one is better than the other. The good thing with intrapreneurship I see is that you can have a lot of control over it because it's internal. When you start going external, things just get more complicated. Things typically delay. You have to deal with other people's, attitudes and mindsets. I just think they serve different purposes. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Jan. The next question, I think, is a very tricky question again. How do you prevent people from dropping out of Kickbox projects? People tend to start and then go.
How do you prevent them from dropping out? So actually, you don't need to prevent them from dropping out. That's kind of the point. That is actually the point of the Kickbox program and why it's designed in this way of having the 6 levels. You actually want people to drop out because it means they don't have what it takes, or they're not maturing their idea. They're not maturing their idea enough. And if that's the case, you want to encourage them killing their idea. That's actually a good result, right? The goal of Kickbox is not to get 100% of participants to the end of the program, to level 6. You want a healthy balance. So you want them to be filtered out. And a lot of people will just give up. We see that all the time, right? Other priorities come into play and they give up. And that's actually what we're looking for. We're looking for the people that have the grit and determination to be able to make this work alongside their busy work schedule, because then it proves they have what it takes. And this goes back a little bit to, looking at the personality. So if you wanted to be sure that more people would get through the Kickbox program, maybe you would actually apply personality testing first before giving out all the boxes to the people, right? To already reduce your cohort and ensure that those people are more suitable for intrapreneurship, then the chances of them giving up are already less. But then you let the 12-week program also filter out the stronger ones that want to continue. So at the end of the day, it is a personal commitment, as entrepreneurship is, right, in the real world. And that is something you want to simulate a little bit by design. You never want to have 100% be able to go through, because it's just not realistic. And I would then argue it's real. You help them too much, that you somehow made it too easy for them, that they're probably not confronting the realities of what it means to be an innovator or an entrepreneur.
Thanks, Jan. That takes me to the next question. We have some time, so I'll take some more questions. The next question is from Harish Kamath. He says that at what stage should a company think of looking for entrepreneurs within a company?
Okay, at what stage? I would say if you want to innovate, it's as simple as that. If you have a department, or ideally board level support for innovation, if you've decided as a company that innovation is important, you want new business models, you want new services, you want to move into new markets, then entrepreneurship is a viable innovation strategy. It can work alongside other strategies as well. And definitely if you want to do something a little bit more exciting for your workforce, because a lot of innovation activities are currently siloed, right? We do something over there in Silicon Valley or a startup hub. We try to matchmake with startups. We do try to do a bit of innovation, open innovation, sorry, with partners. We are investing in R&D. You just need to find an opportunity, and actually it doesn't have to be a company-wide program or anything like that. When we started with Bayer, we literally started with 2 teams. They only had 2 entrepreneurship teams, and the whole thing kind of grew from there, because they started to see it works, it gets results. People love doing this kind of activity. So if you think you've got employees in the organization that can be engaged, I would definitely go for it and just try very small to begin with, and maybe Kickbox is a very good approach. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? There's no good doing it with just one team, because then there might be the wrong team and they might not succeed, and then the whole initiative gets killed. But give yourself a fighting chance. A portfolio, 10 kickboxes or 6 kickboxes would be even a good start, and I'm sure you would see positive results, and then learn how to adapt things for your department or your organization. Get some quick wins, and then grow the entrepreneurship approach from there. And if I just jump back to this graph of the different programs that Bayer had, for example, Kickbox is very much that entry-level one. But if you already have good ideas and you know they're good ideas, right, and they might be a bit more disruptive, you could start maybe with an accelerator approach, which is like Kickbox on steroids, right? And you just got to find where is the right place to start, but it certainly doesn't have to be a company-wide approach. But if you start, just do bear in mind it is a journey. So you would want to receive follow-on funding. If some of those ideas are successful, it then does make sense not to stop, because you have to go through incubation in most cases, or if the idea is fairly incremental, you then do want to push it to launch. So you do want to make sure you could get enough interest from sponsors and stakeholders that you could launch one of these ideas if it does begin to show enough traction. So that's my long answer to that one.
Thank you, Jan. A few questions more, please. So there's a question from Ravi Kant. Is there any tool to check individual team entrepreneurship quotient before and after the program? So I think we can, he's referring the DNA test, which you can answer, I guess.
Yeah, so the DNA test is an online personality test. It takes 30 minutes for an entrepreneur to complete. And if you did it with a lot of people, you would be presented with a dashboard where you can collect all of their results and compare the different people together. So that is actually the cheapest way to start analyzing people you have, and one of the most effective. So we have actually run programs with and without the DNA test, right? Using it as a selection criteria. And when we use it as a selection criteria, we've seen that those teams perform at least 40% better than other teams that were just randomly selected or selected using other devices that don't take personality into account. So it's one of the cheapest things you can do. It's very fast, and it will have one of the biggest impact on your innovation ROI for your program. Again, you can ask Qglue for access to the test.
Sure. So the next question is pretty much towards the strategy thing. The question says, how does one align business strategy with entrepreneurship areas?
Yep, very good question. You definitely should align strategy, because the danger here, right, is that we start working on ideas that management find too easy to kill later on. So one trick, and we totally didn't talk about it today, is to create something that's called an innovation thesis, where you align top management and stakeholders basically on what is it that we would be willing to invest in and what is it that we're not willing to invest in. And obviously that has to align with the strategy. So all of this needs to be put on the table up front, and based on that outcome, you would then design your innovation campaign, for example, or your call for ideas. And that would dictate what type of ideas you would be asking for from your audience. So even if you set up a Kickbox, you could have a theme for your Kickbox, right? You could say, we only want to accept teams or participants that think they want to do innovation in the supply chain, for example, or think they want to do new business model innovation. So you could have a theme for each of your program that feeds in the right kind of idea and hopefully minimizing that effect of prematurely killing the idea later just because management think it doesn't align with their strategy. So yeah, it would be very smart to try to engineer that upfront.
Yeah, and considering this of time, I guess the last three questions from my end. Uh, the question is from Shashank Rajiv. He says, what were some of the hiccups or rather challenges which you faced when adopting the Kickbox for a buyer for the first time?
Okay, that's a good one. One of the challenges, I guess, that we faced was getting the prototype fund down to a low value. So in our accelerator programs, we have a lot of options here in the prototype fund. And when we did Kickbox, we realized we can't allow people to do everything to the normal extent that we would do it in an accelerator. So we had to really pick what is a good path, or what would be, here you can see it's just two options really that we put together plus a few other add-ons on the side. So that was one of the challenges because you wanted to make sure this remains a cheap enough program, yet you wanted to make sure the teams are able to get validation. And actually, I've got another slide in the appendix, so you'll see this in the presentation. I guess this really summarizes our challenges, is deciding exactly what goes into the physical box. That wasn't too bad. But really then the e-learning and the assignment. So how much content should we give? What's the right content to give at each stage? How can we make sure we have a project manager or a mentor available to give the feedback? And the expert mentoring. How can we make sure we schedule? So this was one of the problems. We in the beginning, we left it up to the team themselves to schedule mentor calls with the mentor when they wanted it, right? And the problem is teams got lazy. They thought they could do everything by themselves, and they just didn't progress with their project. They weren't scheduling the mentor calls. So we had, a fairly high rate of failed projects. Then we started mandating and said, okay, no, you have to have your mentor call, and this is the type of mentor call you're going to have. At this level, it will be 30 minutes, and it'll be for this specific reason. In this level, it will be for 60 minutes, and it will be for this specific reason. So we learned when our mentor call is the most effective, and we mandated that the participants have to take it, and they have to fill in a little summary of what that mentor call was about and upload that with their assignments as well. So that was something that made a big difference and increased the throughput of the program, but still not making it easy, right? They still had to do the work and get the results that we were expecting. So I hope that answers that question a little bit.
Thank you, Jan. The next question is from Ketki, and she says that the critical assumptions validation, does it need to happen at each stage considering all the 4 stages, or it should be done only after or before prototyping?
Yeah, so in terms of the Kickbox program, you begin testing assumptions actually in level 4. So 4A and 4B here are designed to help pull out what are the most critical assumptions. You might be running customer interviews then in that level. And then when you go to level 5, this might be where you actually use a bit more of the prototyping. So you already learned something, you probably zoomed in on which customer segment to focus on. Maybe you had to pivot already from the previous level. And then in level 5, you might be using a little bit more that prototype fund, right, to actually demonstrate your solution and gain learnings before going into level 6. So that's how it's structured in the Kickbox program. However, in other programs, I would argue it's very much a ongoing thing. A week in, week out, you are testing assumptions, and you might be running 1 to 2 experiments every single week. Again, that is why the Kickbox program is fairly entry-level program. If you have an idea where you know it's already an important idea, it's more disruptive, it does need a lot of validation, then maybe we would encourage you not to take a Kickbox program, but actually to put it into more of an accelerator program where you are continuously testing and building up that validation.
Thanks, Jan. So the last question that goes is from Kripanita Mukherjee, and it says that what would be your advice for a traditional organization with no history of innovation to start on this kind of a journey? What are some of the things one could do to start an internal incubation center to promote problem solving and encouraging the baby steps for the employees?
Yeah, good question. If there's no history of innovation, it definitely can be difficult to get up and running. The first thing you want to do is focus on finding other people, your allies, who share your mindset, who believe that starting to innovate would be valuable for the organization. And just try to get a little bit of funding for some level of support, whether that's just some mentorship or coaching from someone. Try to find a problem to actually solve and work on, right? You want to turn it into a real project. You can very much do a bottoms up scenario where you can be the leader of this way of working, but you have to prove, it works and you can get results by applying it to real projects. If you can get any kind of sponsorship, so someone to give you a little bit of money where maybe you could apply some DNA test to prove you do have entrepreneurs in the organization, or you will be emailed an offer, I think, from Qglue later, where you can just get started with e-learning and even share with your management. There's a 90-minute e-learning version actually designed for managers to introduce them to all of these topics and just see if they would be willing to give it a try. So again, don't worry about rolling it out across the entire company or having the CEO's backing. Just find a problem to solve, start small, and see if you can grow it from there by getting a little bit of support.
Thanks, Jan. I think that wraps up most of the questions. So we can conclude the session.
Great questions, guys. Excellent questions. Kept me on my feet. Thanks everyone for attending. And Akash, I guess you'll be following up with people, right?
Sure, I'll do. Thank you all. Thank you all for joining the webinar. I hope you liked it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Jan.